Hello everyone, Kaoz here, and welcome to another old school RuneScape video. Whenever I'm streaming, people ask me how they can improve at PVMing. My answer is always something along the lines of, what levels do you have, what's your gear, what's the hardest boss you've ever fought, and it ends up being a back and forth where I'm not even sure if the person asking got anything out of my suggestion. This is why I thought it would be a good idea making a video with the 10 things I consider everyone and anyone can follow to naturally become a much better player. Boys and girls, we are on the final stretch to 100,000 subscribers, so if you enjoyed this video, make sure to hit the subscribe and the like buttons, and if you're looking for further guidance, join our Discord with the link in the description to interact with me and our amazing community. As always, a quick disclaimer for this video, these are just 10 things I personally recommend doing and getting used to, so you can naturally improve at the general PVM and raids. If you think I missed something, check out the end of the video where I'll ask you for your opinion, and of course be entered in our weekly bond giveaway. That being said, let's learn how to play this 20-year-old browser game for children a little bit better. The very first thing I recommend doing is getting used to F keys. I'm sure a ton of you playing on your computer already do this, but I'm also certain at least one of you is going to learn about this for the very first time. I'll show you how to do it, and then I'll tell you a little story to show why it's so important. If you remember playing this game for the very first time, you might recall that pretty much all we used was the mouse and maybe the arrow keys on your keyboard to move the camera. Clicking would swap between your tabs like inventory, prayers, skills, and equipment, just to mention a few. If you go to settings, then controls, and scroll down towards the bottom of the segment, you will see this category which lets you keybind said tabs to your F keys. This way, you don't need clicks to navigate through your menu, and this is something you absolutely have to get used to in order to start improving at PVMing. There is also a RuneLite plugin called Key Remapping, which lets you do the same thing, but with other keys on your keyboard, just in case F keys are a little farther to reach. This is something I started learning when my Inferno grind began. Prior to this, I knew about the use of F keys, but I was so stubborn that any and every activity I ever did was simply with my mouse. The minuscule amount of PVM experience I gathered on my way to maxing, including extremely difficult challenges such as Vorkath and Kraken, were done without the use of F keys. When you get into higher tier encounters, navigating through your inventory, prayers, and spells will be the first step into developing muscle memory needed for tougher fights. This next one is not mechanical, but we'll quickly go over how damage works in OSRS to give you a better understanding of what items to use. Keep in mind we are not looking at the entire formula for simplicity's sake, and this is before the proposed defense changes that might go live in 2024. The first thing to note is, what monster are you going to fight? Whether it be a Slayer monster or a boss, every single enemy in this game has their own stats. If you check out their wiki page, you will see what attack style they have the lowest defense against, so that would be the most effective. I say most effective because for non-bosses, you can use whatever attack style and it won't hinder your DPS too much. If you fight gargoyles with either a whip for slash, a rapier for stab, or a bludgeon for crush, your DPS will be almost the same. For bosses on the other hand, there's a greater incentive to use the style they are weak against, not only because their overall stats are higher, but because defense to other combat styles will make it nearly impossible for you to hit. For example, the Soul Heredit, which has insane defense against ranged and magic. When you know what combat and attack style to use, wear items to increase your offensive bonuses on the desired attack style. The higher the number, the better chance you will have to land a successful hit, and then your damage will land between 0 and your max hit. Max hit is calculated based off your melee, ranged, and magic strength. So, in most cases, items that increase these stats will be a much better option as opposed to defensive items. Needless to say, remember that your levels, potions, and offensive prayers will be absolutely crucial to increase your damage. Levels are more important than gear, so this is why we also want to prioritize the use of things like super combat and ranging potions, or even an imbued heart if you can afford them. Up next we have the tick system, which naturally leads us into attack speeds. If you didn't know, old school RuneScape and even RuneScape 3 at the time of making this video run on something called the ticks. You can look at the system as a sort of clock, and everything in the game happens at a rate of 0.6 seconds. Now, this doesn't mean that you can do absolutely anything every 0.6 seconds, as some actions like eating food or drinking potions have a delay, of course to make it balanced and making sure you can't eat like 10 pieces of food at once. If you have never noticed this before and want to learn the timing, grab something like a locator orb or a dwarven rock cake, and spam it as fast as you can. You will notice that no matter what, hit splats will appear every tick, or again every 0.6 seconds. This affects pretty much anything in the game, and you need to know this timing by heart if you want to do higher tier bossing and raids, since you will know exactly when to attack, when to pray, and when to eat, for example. This leads us to player and monster attack speeds. Depending on what weapon you equip, you will attack every few ticks. The fastest you can attack is with either knives or darts on rapid style, including the blowpipe at 2 ticks. And the slowest attack speed in the game is the dark bow at 9 ticks. Some other standard weapons are scimitars at 4 ticks, some crossbows at 6 ticks, and the trident type weapons at 4 ticks. Monsters also have their own attack styles, and these have a lot more variety because of the amount of enemies in the game. These range from attacking every single tick, to Jad attacking every 9 ticks, and the pre-healer Zuck every 10 ticks, just to mention a few. This will be absolutely crucial to learn later down the road. Prayer flicking is next because we already know about ticks and attack speed. Prayer flicking means activating either offensive or defensive prayers right before you're about to attack, or when your enemy is about to attack. There's a little caveat to this because some monsters' damage is calculated before they launch their attack, and others' damage is calculated as soon as their projectile hits you. But more about this later. For offensive prayers, right before you are going to attack, you can turn them on for 1 tick, and then turn them off right after you damage the enemy. This means that your attack is going to be powered up by either Piety, Rigor, or Augury, or lower tier prayers, even though it's not highly recommended because they don't really do too much. You can do the exact same thing with monster attacks. Let's say you are fighting a Dust Devil, which attack every 4 ticks. If you activate your prayer right before they are going to attack you, and then turn it off right away, you will completely block their attack. Remember that for other monsters, Protection Prayer will only mitigate damage, but if you're comfy enough, you can still flick when possible to save on prayer. And speaking of saving prayer, does this mean that you have infinite prayer when you do this? Well, yes and no. If you activate and deactivate prayer for a single tick, you are not going to lose any prayer points. However, your prayer technically has decimals, and with higher prayer bonus, the longer you have until you lose a prayer point. Something crucial for the no prayer Jad run is to have high prayer bonus and only use protection prayers for single ticks. On the topic of prayer flicking and damage, up next we take a look at knowing which monsters damage you as soon as they launch their attack, and which monsters damage you as soon as their projectiles reach you. If it doesn't make sense, let me explain. I will start with the former because almost all monsters behave this way. Basically, when an enemy NPC attacks with either ranged or magic, their damage is calculated as soon as the attack animation begins. This means that if you're not protecting against the attack before the monster does this animation, it's already too late, even if you are so far away from the monster. On the other hand, and more recently, there are a few monsters in the game whose attacks only deal damage when their projectiles reach you. 2 examples that come to mind are the Leviathan and the Whisper. Unlike other monsters and the bosses in the game, you can block damage by praying right before their attack lands. This is definitely a case of remembering which bosses have this feature, because not too many in the game work this way. While we're at it, I will also include the topic of tick eating on this segment. Remember how I said that most monsters calculate how much damage they deal as soon as their attack animation begins? Well, if you're about to die and heal right before the projectile reaches you, you will do what's known as tick eating. If a monster is about to deal fatal damage, and you eat something right as it's about to kill you, it will damage you for the rest of your HP, but you will gain HP equal to your healing item, basically saving you from certain death. Now let's focus on prayer movement, and what is known as your true tile. When you run at the game, notice how your character moves smoothly on your screen. Even if you walk, the game will show your character moving in a more natural motion just because it looks better for the player. But internally, your character may not be where it appears. First of all, you should know that when walking, your character moves 1 tile per tick, and when running, it moves 2 tiles instead. Walking is pretty self-explanatory because you only have 8 tiles to go if nothing is blocking you. This means that when running, you can get to any edge of a 5x5 square in 1 tick. This is useful to know at, for example, Baba Boulders to avoid the solid rocks. And for the advanced gamers, there's no better way to put this to the test than the Sodasek maze at the Theater of Blood. I said if nothing is blocking you because if you are trying to run around the corner next to, for example, a Colosseum pillar, your character will only be able to run to the diagonal tiles from your starting position. If you were to walk instead, it would take you 2 tiles to get there. For this, I recommend activating the plugin Tile Indicators on RuneLite and checking the box that says Highlight to True Tile to show where your character truly is. In order to get the hang of movement a lot better is to do the Hallowed Sepulchre, which we will revisit in greater detail in a following video. Okay, so you know how your movement works, but how do monsters move towards you? This may seem pretty trivial because as soon as you attack a monster, or not depending if they are aggressive, and walk towards you naturally, it will charge at you and end up next to you unless something gets in its way. The first thing I want you to do is activate the plugin called NPC Indicators and to check the boxes that say Highlight to True Tile and Highlight Southwest Tile. For enemies 2x2 or larger, their southwest tile is the one who will always try to align with your character. When attacked from a distance, enemies will prioritize diagonal movement, and then they will try to move in straight lines. We can use this to our advantage to safe spot enemies either behind obstacles when they can clearly see us, or by doing something called a corner safe spot. Keep in mind that this is mostly for melee enemies, but we can apply this to monsters that attack with either ranged or magic. The easiest to understand and demonstrate is the first one, and I will use the Inferno melee as an example. Notice how when it walks towards you, it will move diagonally. When both your tile and its southwest tile align vertically, it will just try to get to you in a straight line. And this is why we can trap it behind a pillar. For other monsters, it has the same behavior, but if they have a higher vision range, they will simply start attacking you. If they are trying to get around an obstacle, for example an Inferno pillar, you can just stand on this tile and they will get stuck because they are trying to align horizontally first. This next one is pretty simple, but will increase your skill by quite a lot. I recommend building up the muscle memory needed to quickly perform both gear and prayer switches. This goes hand in hand with F keys because the faster you can swap menus, the better. Just like the previous one, a plugin I recommend for this is inventory tags. One good thing about it is that if someone calls you out for using them, you know that they have never kissed a woman other than their mother. And second, because the less you have to think about where your items are, the better. I mark my melee items with red outlines, ranged with green, and blue with magic. I also mark some of my special attack weapons with either white or purple, depending on if I need to differentiate them for different things. My personal preference is vertical switches because I am better at vertical clicking thanks to dropping fish and minerals on the ground thanks to the max and grind. And some people prefer horizontal switches. If you have multiple items, and even some that require both one or two-handed, you also need to remember that whenever you unequip, let's say, your weapon and defender, when you equip a two-handed weapon, the items will prioritize horizontal inventory spaces. They will basically land on the first free inventory space they find from top left to bottom right. You can intentionally leave empty inventory spaces where your items will land to avoid sending them towards the bottom of your inventory. Another one related to monsters is something called the line of sight. This also has its uses in PKing, but I can count the times I have gone PKing with both my hands. So I will leave this one to the PvP pros and focus on PVM myself. So we know how to safe spot and corner safe spot monsters. However, there will be times in which it looks like a monster can see you, but it cannot attack you. And others where it looks like the monster cannot see you, but it can attack you. This one is a little bit more complicated, so if you want to delve deeper on spaghetti code of this 20-year-old browser game, I recommend a great video by the one and only Whoops, going over how monsters and even players are or are not able to see and attack you. It may sound stupid, but for this one, I simply recommend practicing the content where you need to hide from monsters, as something is blocking in the way. A particular instance of me putting this to use is in the Colosseum. I hang out west of the northwest pillar, and if a major is blocking something like a manticore or a ranger, I have a few tiles for which I know I cannot get attacked if I have Solar Flare active, for example. For this one, it's also nice to remember that if a monster attacking with ranged or magic is able to see you, but their attack range is not far enough, it counts as them not being able to attack, even though the path is 100% open for them to launch an attack. You won't be using this too much at many places, especially at casual, low and mid-level PVMing, but it's important to get used to for much later. And finally, something I recommend for you to get better at PVM is simply testing your abilities according to your levels, gear, and overall skill regarding almost everything we have learned about in this video. For this, I will give a shout out to my bossing ladder video uploaded in September of last year, which has every single boss ranked in order of difficulty, except for Scurious and the Fortis Colosseum since they are new additions. Remember that if you get frustrated with a specific boss, there's nothing wrong with lowering down just a little bit to solidify some crucial mechanics needed for higher level encounters. Once you're more comfortable with more demanding battles, my bossing ladder will be the perfect way to see where to go next to polish those skills. Even if you don't have items such as a Scythe, a T-Bow, or a Tunican Shadow, going into a difficult fight with suboptimal gear will also be somewhat beneficial, because the longer an encounter takes, the more mechanics you will have to interact with, which will naturally help you practice more. This could work as a double-edged sword, and if the fight lasts a little bit too long, you can make more mistakes and end up dying anyway. But remember, as long as you learn from your deaths, you will only go up in the ranks. This is not applicable for hardcores. Ladies and gentlemen, that's pretty much it for this video. Thank you so much for watching and for making it this far. If you did, tell me what you personally think is a crucial skill for people to learn and improve at OSRS PVM. Include the term RSN and your username in your comment, and you will be entered in our weekly bond giveaway, for which we will pick a winner on Friday. I want to give a massive shout out to every channel member who has decided to financially support this project I love so much. My wife, my puppy and I cannot thank you enough for it. If you want to join this list of legends, click the join button below and see all of the cool perks you can get in the channel, in the videos, and of course in the Discord. For now, I hope you have an amazing day, have an amazing week, and I will see you then. Peace.